It is week 2 of the 2025 NFL season. This is O Captain, My Captain, Club Fantasy's DFS Showdown breakdown of the NFL primetime games. Today's video is focusing on Thursday night's matchup between the Washington Commanders and the Green Bay Packers. We're breaking it all down next. Welcome, everybody, to Oh Captain, My Captain, Club Fantasy's DFS Showdown breakdown video. I'm your host, Josh Hudson. That is our DFS expert, Austin Amendolia. And today, we're breaking down the Week 2 Thursday Night Football matchup between the Washington Commanders and the Green Bay Packers. Remember, if you are watching this video over on the YouTube, hit that like, hit the subscribe to our channel. If you're listening over on Apple, Spotify, or any other podcast platform, hit that follow button so you never miss a showdown breakdown. You can also hop in our free public Discord where you can talk all things DFS with everyone here at the Club Fantasy team. Austin, let's get right into it. It's the Washington Commanders versus the Green Bay Packers. Our first category is Captain Chalk. These are the chalky captains that everybody is likely to pick simply because they are that good. And there's a really good quarterback in this game. There's actually two good quarterbacks, but there's a really, really good quarterback in this game, Austin. Let's talk about Mr. I'm sitting on the thumbnail this week, Jayden Daniels.
Yeah, so Jayden Daniels clearly is the quarterback, I think, with more upside in this matchup, in part because he is going to run the ball more. Jordan Love isn't really known for his scrambling skill set, and because of that, Jayden Daniels has more of the ceiling outcome from a fantasy perspective than Jordan Love does. So it makes a ton of sense to want to put him in the captain spot. The things that I will say about having him there on the pros, having Daniels in the captain spot means you're going to soak up most of the fantasy production on that side of the ball, as opposed to having anybody from Green Bay in the captain spot, because Green Bay spreads the ball around a lot. And because they spread it around so much, it's really hard for one of their players to be optimal in this lineup. So you could have Jayden Daniels and that be your only Washington Commander in your captain spot and probably be just fine because of the nature of how Green Bay plays their offense. The only concern I have is Daniels does have a little bit of a high pressure to sack ratio, especially after week 1. Now that's 1 week of stats, but he was sacked on 30% of his pressures last week. And the Packers defense was pretty good at getting pressure last week. So I do have some concern about him failing as the chalk. But it's not to the point where I'm like, don't play him in the captain spot, right? He's still Jayden Daniels. He's still got the upside, but it's worth considering if you're playing a lot of contests, maybe don't put all of your eggs in the Jayden Daniels basket.
Yeah, this is definitely one of those, if you're entering multiple entry tournaments where you can get a little bit different, you can sprinkle in some Daniels, you can get into some of the contrarian captain choices that we're going to talk about. But like you said, Jayden Daniels and his legs, that's where the money's at. He led Washington in rush attempts last week, and 4 of those 11 were scrambles. He had over 50% of his rush attempts last year being scrambles. So even if they're able to get pressure, he has the ability to break through, even if he's not getting design runs. And he's got plenty of weapons. I mean, you go out and you get a Deebo Samuel. He led this team in receiving production last week, which was a great sign for a free agent acquisition. So there's going to be plenty of opportunity for Jayden Daniels to knock this out of the park. Let's get into the next category, the Mutineers. These are the contrarian captain choices that offer some variety and upside in some of these larger tournaments. Let's stay on the Commander side, Austin. Literally just mentioned him. Deebo Samuel came out, led this team last week, 7 catches, 77 yards. We kind of talked about, or at least I did in the offseason on our flagship show, no pun intended, how much is Washington going to let Deebo Samuel run? Well, contributed a 19-yard touchdown run. So what do you kind of see from him in this game that helps lineups get a little bit different?
Yeah, what I see for him is I think he's gonna be lower rostered than Jayden Daniels, Josh Jacobs, And I think he could even be lower rostered than Terry McLaurin. And for Deebo Samuel, the thing that I saw coming out of week 1 was volume. Not only did he get that rushing touchdown, he had 7 catches in the game, which was by far the lead receiver in Washington last week. Terry McLaurin, or the next, it may have been Terry McLaurin, I can't remember, but I know the next highest reception leader in the team last week only had 4 catches. So Debo was far and away above the number 1 target last week. And I think people are not going to be ready to buy into that because of what we've seen out of Debo in recent years. And so they may be slow to push him up in rostership percentage. And I could see this being a time to take advantage of that and put him in your captain spot.
Yeah, the one thing I know is that 10 targets last week, 7 catches. The next closest had 5. That was Zach Ertz. So, I mean, Terry McLaurin only had 4 targets last week. Yes, we know all the talk about the holdout. Obviously, there's a comfortability there between Daniels and Debo, and maybe until McLaurin kind of gets up to speed, Debo's going to be looking his way. So, lends itself to some good opportunities here. On the flip side of that, Green Bay Packers, Josh Jacobs seems like the most trustworthy guy when you're looking at a slate where the passing offense, there's so many different options that you could very easily get burned, whereas there's really only one option in that backfield for Green Bay.
Exactly. You hit on it. Josh Jacobs is the only one really getting the ball in the backfield. He had 20 touches last week. The thing I would have liked to see is a few more catches. He only had 1 catch last week. It was 19 rushes. So that's a little bit not great for DraftKings. It does mean that he's a really interesting play on FanDuel, where it's only a half PPR website. But the thing that I like about Josh Jacobs and playing him in the captain spot here is running backs are often overlooked in showdown slates in general. They tend to be pushed down in rostership compared to receivers and quarterbacks, especially. And as we saw last week, Green Bay looked really good out of the gate. And not only did they look really good out of the game, their offensive line looked really good out of the game. They were getting really good movement against Detroit's defensive line last week. And I don't have a lot of assurances that Washington's defensive line is going to put up much more of a fight than what Detroit did. And so I could see, similar to last week, Green Bay getting ahead in this matchup early and being able to run the ball with Josh Jacobs and experience more success with that offensive line getting good movement at the line of scrimmage consistently. The other thing, too, is if Jacob scores 2 touchdowns, he's probably going to be the optimal player because I don't think there's any other player outside of maybe Jaden Daniels that can score 2 rushing touchdowns like that in a game.
Yeah, 100%. The only other person I would add to this would be Jordan Love. And we talked about the passing options simply because there's good options here in the Green Bay passing game, but they spread the ball around so much. I talked about it all off season. No Packers player last season had more than not even 6 targets total per game. So they're going to divvy it up. Last week, nobody topped 5 targets. So who does that ultimately benefit when you're talking about fantasy football? It's the quarterback position.
Yes.
So that's ultimately what you want to look for when it comes to these captains. And then you build everything out with our next category, the first mates. Every captain needs a reliable crew. So these are going to be the standouts that maximize those lineups. Let's stay on that Green Bay side. I talked about Tucker Kraft all off season. He caught a touchdown last week. Good things, even if there were only 2 catches total in the game for him.
Yeah, so he did catch a touchdown last week. The thing I like about him, though, in general, is that he does have the ability to get those explosive plays. And I think he is probably the most consistent and reliable pass catcher in this Green Bay offense right now. Now, I think Romeo Doubs may have something to say about that as we move throughout this year. But Tucker Kraft, I think, is going to be a really solid option. The thing I also wanted to call out about him, he seems to be an especially brilliant play on FanDuel this week. He is cheaper on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings. And we often skew towards DraftKings, but that price difference really caught my eye when we were prepping for the show. I think that in FanDuel contests, like he could truly be a difference maker because if like Josh mentioned, if he scores a touchdown in this matchup on FanDuel in particular, he's almost guaranteed to be in that optimal lineup. And we know Jordan Love is looking to get him the ball at least a few times a game.
Yeah, he's one of the best yak tight ends in the NFL, up there on the level of George Kittle. So love that call out. Another pass catcher here, Austin Eckler. I mean, 6,800 on DraftKings, 7,800 on FanDuel. I mean, he's the guy catching passes because when you look at the other running backs on this Washington team, they're not pass catchers at all. So that really benefits his stock on DraftKings.
Yes, definitely so. And I think what's interesting about this to me is I could see people floating toward Shakori Krosky Merritt because he scored more fantasy points last week, because he scored a touchdown, because he had 80 yards rushing and then getting it the end zone. If Austin Eckler scores a touchdown last week instead of Jakrosky Merritt, suddenly Austin Eckler is the number one running back on this offense. And so I could see people being like, oh, it's Bill season. Like, let's go towards him and play him again. And Austin Eckler getting overlooked when he's the pass catcher and he could ultimately end up popping a touchdown or two and being more optimal. So this is really just a pivot move off of the other running back and making sure that I'm playing the game theory a little bit here and saying, you know what, it's still an ambiguous backfield situation to me. Krosky Merritt is not a 3-down back. He's not just overtaking this full sale. Austin Eckler is still an interesting play in those tournament settings.
Yeah, and you mentioned the game theory aspect of it. If this game is close, they might lean on the veteran.
Yeah.
Get Austin Eckler in the backfield. He's going to be a threat out of the backfield catching the passes. But also, too, if Green Bay ends up firing on all cylinders, running away with this game, what's going to happen? They're going to want to throw the ball. That's going to lend more snaps to Austin Eckler, which, again, offers more opportunity in these lineups.
And to your point, Eckler is a better pass blocker, and I think it's going to be like they had a tough, the Giants front seven is pretty good as well. I think they're going to be in for another challenging game and potentially a more challenging game with Micah Parsons on the other side of the ball, and having Eckler in more often to be there to pass block as well, I think will really help his usage in this game.
Yeah, a couple other options, just looking at pricing and how everything is kind of divvied up here on DraftKings. You might want to look at the kickers in this game as well. Brandon McManus specifically for the Packers. The way that the pricing is worked out, you're basically getting a couple of top guys, and then you're fishing for some level of boom. At least with the kickers, there's some level of consistency. If they can hit a couple of field goals, they're likely going to end up with 2, maybe even 3 extra points in this game. So there is at least a better consistency when it comes to floor options there with some of the kickers. Our next category, the deck scrubbers. These are going to be the cheap punt plays that can make or break a lineup based on one play or limited opportunity. Let's start with Romeo Doubs. He only caught 2 passes last week, but they targeted him downfield, which lends me to some of his player props and longest reception numbers. So I kind of like this for Romeo Doubs here.
Yeah, and he was being used early in the game too, which was the thing that stuck out to me. Is they clearly wanted to get him the ball initially, and he brought energy that I don't know that I've ever seen from a Green Bay Packer wide receiver, where he was just getting fired up off the bat, and it communicated to me that they want to see him active and involved in the game early and often. And I could see him becoming more of a volume hog in this offense. To your point, Josh, like I don't think he's going to be getting like 8-9 targets a game, because that's just not how this offense works. But if he can get a consistent 5 to 7 targets from week to week, I think he'll become a staple. And he's only 4K on DraftKings, whereas there are other guys like Matthew Golden who are priced more highly than him. And Matthew Golden was nowhere in week 1. So I think like it is totally fine to just go back to the well with him, and he will get those high volume down the field targets.
He also has a history of scoring touchdowns with Jordan Love. So there's definitely going to be that opportunity there for Romeo Doubs.
Exactly. And moving on in this section, there are 2 other picks I wanted to name. Sticking on the Green Bay Packers side, I think it's interesting to consider playing their defense this week. I already mentioned that Jaden Daniels, he was sacked 3 times last week on 10 pressures. So that's a 30% pressure to sack ratio. He struggled with it a little bit last year. Depending on what source you're coming at, he had between 19 and 21% pressure to sack ratio last year. And this Packers defense last week was putting pressure on the quarterback early and often. And with Micah Parsons on the other side of the ball, I could see the Packers getting a couple of sacks. And if they were to get a couple of turnovers here and there, suddenly they're pushing towards being in the optimal. Especially, I wanted to point this out, if you're playing Josh Jacobs in the captain spot, because one of the ways that Josh Jacobs likely eats in this matchup is they get up big early on, potentially contributed by a defensive touchdown. And in that case, the defense is performing well now. And there are going to be people who are not going to want to play the defense, but that can be a way to correlate and get some nice upside in this matchup.
Game theory, folks. Game theory. Love it. One more pick off than Noah Brown from the Commanders.
And that's the thing that I love about showdown slates, which is why also Noah Brown is a really interesting player here. This is a large field tournament only setting, so let's just caveat that. But he is one of the cheaper guys that I feel like is actually worth something in this matchup. There's a lot of cheap players as you start to scroll down, but I doubt most of them get a touch, if a snap, in this game. But Noah Brown, we have seen him have these weird ceiling games in this offense. And then even before he came to Washington, he would have these weird pop games. So to me, him being $3,200 on DraftKings and FanDuel, if he's able to get 2 catches for 50 yards, like that's fine, right? I don't think this is going to be a super high scoring matchup from a fantasy perspective. And so him getting 50 yards or 50 receiving yards, like that's going to be enough to make a difference in these leagues, especially because he's probably going to go overlooked because people are going to want to really attack the Green Bay receivers and focus on more of the high end Washington Commander players. So I'm particularly a fan of him, especially like even if Washington gets behind, like he could then get some pop plays that way as they're trying to play catch up. I think Noah Brown, he's a stud. You should make sure to have some exposure to him, especially if you're playing large field tourneys.
All right, friendly reminder, you can play these showdown slates against us over on DraftKings as well as FanDuel. You can hit the link in the description. That'll take you right over there to join our Club Fantasy Leagues on those channels. You can also make sure that you get those links by joining in our Discord because Austin drops them in there every single week. Our last category is the Kraken. These are the lineup traps that will sink the ship. Josh Jacobs had 76% of the rush share. So why is Emmanuel Sanders $2,000?
Yes, Emmanuel Wilson is $2K on DraftKings.
Wilson, sorry, I just completely said the wrong name.
Yeah, no, you're good. $2K on DraftKings, $2,400 on FanDuel. I do not understand this at all, but this is just for me to say exactly what Josh did. Don't play any of the other running backs for Green Bay. They're not going to get the volume. Maybe one of them gets 1 carry for 2 yards and a touchdown. I am not going to bet on that. I am not going to guess which one that is. I think it's going to be Josh Jacobs rolling. That's what we did in week 1. And we've seen when Josh Jacobs is healthy, he is the number 1 running back in this offense. I'm not concerning myself with any of the other running backs, let alone Emmanuel Wilson.
Yeah, friendly reminder to like and subscribe if you're listening over on YouTube. And if you're listening on Apple, Spotify, or any other podcast platform, hit that follow button so you never miss a showdown breakdown. And you also won't miss Friday mornings when we drop DFS Academy from Austin and Ryan. They're going to be breaking down the Sunday DFS slate. So plenty of reasons to give us a follow. So don't miss out on any of the DFS action here at Club Fantasy FFL. And once again, hit that link in the description of the podcast and you can join our free public Discord for all kinds of fantasy football talk, baseball talk, all kinds of sports talk. It's a lot of fun and it's slowly growing. We appreciate each and everybody that comes through. He's Austin. I'm Josh. This has been Oh Captain, My Captain. Good luck with your Thursday night showdown slates. Enjoy.